Welcome to my presentation for Liberty University U.S. History 512. My presentation is on Christopher Gasden, a fiery Federalist. Sam Adams, Patrick Henry, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson. These are names widely known as patriots or founding fathers. In the shadow of these great men, many early patriots and influential figures of the Revolution often go unnoticed and unappreciated for their contributions. One of these men is Christopher Gasden of South Carolina. In South Carolina, school children learn about Eliza Lucas Pinckney and Francis Marion, and some possibly recognize the names of Laurens and Sumter, but few probably know and understand the importance of Christopher Gasden to both United States and South Carolina history. Gasden was a member of the South Carolina Commons House of Assembly, a representative to South Carolina to the Stamp Act Congress and to both Continental Congresses. He has been described as radical, fiery, impulsive, violent, and a hothead. However, these radical, revolutionary monikers deserve further consideration. Richard Walsh in Christopher Gasden, Radical or Conservative Revolutionary, contemplates the interesting question. Walsh concludes that Gasden was no radical, at least not in the later phases of the Revolution. Did Gasden's fundamental beliefs that compelled him to fight for independence from Britain change drastically, or did he maintain a steady course in his view before, during, and after the Revolution? I'll explore this question further, but first, I'll familiarize you with some of the highlights of Christopher Gasden's illustrious career and help us determine the nature of his beliefs concerning government and its proper role, and whether or not these beliefs undertook drastic changes during and after the Revolution. Gasden's political career began with his election to the South Carolina House of Commons. In 1762, he was embroiled in one of the earliest controversies when Governor Boone decided to use the election process to challenge the authority and power of the House of Commons. Jack Green outlines the details of the struggle between the governor and the House, and Gasden's prominent role as an outspoken critic of Governor Boone's actions. The full state of the dispute betwixt the governor and the Commons House of the Assembly and His Majesty's province in South Carolina in America was sent to the South Carolina agent in London, Charles Garth, and provides the basis for the argument by the Commons for their authority to validate their own elections. The House and Gasden claimed these rights as British citizens to representation as established by the Grand Charter and the Constitution. Gasden and the Assembly were successful in gaining the dismissal of Governor Boone and preserving their authority in the colony. Fast on the heels of the election controversy, Gasden and other colonists found themselves in the midst of another struggle with England in the form of the Stamp Act. Gasden was sent from South Carolina as a representative to the Stamp Act Congress, where he was a proponent of non-importation. He also made it clear he believed that Parliament did not have any authority over internal taxation, which should be the jurisdiction of the colonial assemblies under English law. Here, his later support of the Federalists can be seen in his plea that there ought to be no New England man, no New Yorker, etc., known on the continent, but all of us Americans. When he returned to South Carolina, Gasden was active in a local Sons of Liberty group in Charleston and was instrumental in reaching across socio-economic and political boundaries to unite groups in support of repeal of the Stamp Act. He also urged the Assembly to appeal to Britain on grounds of constitutional authority of the Assembly to not be taxed without representation. He was successful in uniting the people in South Carolina in enforcement of non-importation agreements. In an article in the South Carolina Gazette in February of 1766, he used a Latin heading which translated meant liberty or death, way before Patrick Henry, a signal of the degree of his commitment to the cause. His Whig bent is evident during this phase of colonial and British relations in a letter he writes when sending documents to London regarding the Stamp Act. He said, "Not even a pretense was suggested in or out of Parliament when the Stamp Act passed that the Americans had done anything to forfeit their charters or to lose their essential rights and liberties, and many amongst us, those too of clear and independent fortunes, have bravery and virtue enough to risk everything, to go the most desperate lengths rather than submit to so unconstitutional an act." As events continued toward conflict, Gadsden was again in the middle of the fray. During the Tea Act crisis, Gadsden and other South Carolinians had essentially met on their own, organizing themselves to act apart from the royal governor or council. Again, the basis for their actions was their belief that their rights for representation were protected under British law, and that their representative assembly in the Carolinas should be recognized for its rights to govern its own citizens. Christopher Gadsden represented South Carolina at both Continental Congresses, where he became lifelong friends with John Adams, with whom he shared similar views. According to Godbold, a biographer of Gadsden, during the proceedings, false news of a British attack in Boston prompted Gadsden to call for an immediate counterattack. Although these outbursts are frequently used to demonstrate Gadsden's radical bent, he actually worked together with others in Congress and did not continue to call others to fight at the time. During the Second Continental Congress, Gadsden agreed with others to try to resolve the issues with Britain before resorting to war. Again, as in the Stamp Act Congress, he argued for actions that treated all colonies fairly and did not even support special privileges for South Carolina in actions of non-importation. During the Congress, Gasden was appointed to the Naval Commission and is credited with creating the famous "Don't Tread on Me" flag. Another reason he's often connected with radicalism. After independence was declared, events in South Carolina evidenced the very goals and methods thought best for the state, causing tensions to rise between different factions over numerous issues. One issue involved a loyalty oath designed to root out loyalists, along with plans to confiscate property from all loyalists. Gasden, acting as vice president of the state, spoke out vehemently against a group of mechanics and others, his previous supporters, who rioted against the enforcement of the proclamations. Gadsden called for the end of the riots, later calling the protesters artfully stirred up and set a-going by a cabal. Richard Walsh interprets this reaction as a move, quote, far to the right, while Gadsden biographers Godbold and Woody claim it, quote, does not represent a major change in his political thinking. He was a strict constitutionalist. Which interpretation is best, if either one? Pauline Maier, in Whigs Against Whigs, the Imperial Debates of 1765 to 76, reconsidered, gives an interesting framework within which to attempt to answer the question of which interpretation is right. She contends that the basis of colonial resistance was not all that different from the basis for parliamentary authority, both being rooted in Whig interpretation, which vests power in representative assemblies and authority to a constitution for the basis of rights. In this light, it's understandable that after achieving independence, those who led the rebellion, like Gadsden, became leaders and therefore sought to protect the newfound rights of their representative legislatures. Because of his devotion to republicanism and federalism over growing democratic strains, Gasden has been misinterpreted as making a drastic change in his beliefs. However, in declaring independence and opposing riots against the lawful acts of the Assembly, Gasden was asserting the same support for constitutionalism and representative government. Through this lens, Gasden's statements later in his life concerning the authority of the Constitution and the appropriate actions of American citizens is understandable. He said, "Like true Republicans, my friends, whatever is once constitutionally carried, whether by a single or number of votes, the very nature, the foundation spring of our Constitution, call upon you to submit quietly to and to support it if necessary. Otherwise, as far as it is with you, you seem to turn tyrants, determined to carry at all events your own opinion, joined with the fewest against the constitutional resolve." Like many founding fathers, Christopher Gasden remained resolute and steadfast in his belief in the foundation of rights and liberties as being rooted in constitutions, whether British, American, or South Carolinian, that established and protected a republican form of representative government. Christopher Gasden was an important figure during the Revolution, not only for South Carolina, but for all of America. His contributions were appreciated at the time of his death, with a eulogy which stated, "The journals of the Commons House of Assembly of the colony are a faithful record of labors that justly entitle him to a high rank among the most virtuous and valuable statesmen of our country." While other founders remain more prominent, students of U.S. and particularly South Carolina history can learn much about the nature of the revolutionary movement and the importance of our Constitution by studying the life of Christopher Gasden, a passionate, sometimes impulsive, yet steadfast and ardent Republican and Constitutionalist.